Good morning, good morning, good morning, Pura Vida. Welcome to everyone. Today, our Bali Rika Dharma group is so pleased to have a long awaited guest speaker, Sheila Richards, president of the Perez Zeledon Women's Club, who gives a talk that is designed to really increase our sense of well-being because it is a really good thing to know what to do and how to handle a situation such as a death. This talk was originally planned for several years ago, but because of COVID and other obstacles, we had to delay it. And now it is here, thanks to Barbara Johnson, who has been persistent and patient in arranging and rearranging this schedule. She and Sheila work together wonderfully. So I'm going to let Barbara now introduce Sheila Richards. Come on, Barbara.
Thank you, Ruthie.
Okay.
It's my pleasure to introduce Sheila Richards. We've known each other for over 10 years, I think 13 years. When I first came, she's been in the country since 2006. She lives in Rivas in San Isidro, has a lovely compound in Rivas. And after a very successful career, she wasn't happy just tending to her orchids. She decided to found the International Women's Committee for Perez Zeledon. And I met her, I believe, in Bazookas one day, and she said, "Hey, are you interested?" And the rest is history. It's a very successful women's group and lots of programs, etc. So I can talk about that at another time. But it's my pleasure to introduce Sheila, who has researched death and dying, what it means in Costa Rica, what the laws are, what the questions are that you gringos may have. So I'll turn it over to Sheila.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Ruth, and thank you for the invitation. The pleasure of joining you all in this beautiful setting. And I look around compared to many of the groups that I find myself in, and a lot of you are terribly young.
Terribly.
Terribly.
Oh yeah, we're terribly young.
Damn it! About to hit 73, sorry. It's actually 63 because it's all moved by 10 years. You'll understand that. The 70s are the new 60s. And you're probably not thinking of the end of life and planning death and all that sordid stuff. But there's only one thing that's sure: we're born and we die. End of story. And it will come to us all eventually. I'm from Scotland. My accent and some of my expressions may be different for you. And I don't have a particularly loud voice. Very nice to have this lovely intimate setting. But if my voice trails and you don't hear me, just stick your hand up and I'll try and project a bit more. I have members of the club who sit at the back and say, "I can't hear you." And I say, "Well, come to the front." Excuse me. Did I think I'd be doing this sort of thing in retirement? Absolutely not. I had a totally crazy life in the UK and ran away from 80-hour weeks and too much responsibility and thought, damn it, I've done my bit for the nation. I'm off. And I thought I'd have the tranquilo like everybody else. But here we are, and talking to my friend Susie, who's here on holiday at the moment from the States on the way down. But where did I start on this journey? And I'll share this little story because it's amusing. I had Canadian neighbours who very quickly came and introduced themselves to John and I when we arrived. And Susie, unfortunately, had cancer and she had a recurrence, decided not to have therapy, knew that her end was limited. We'd had a bad storm, the Alma storm, a lot of fallen trees. She was deteriorating and she decided that she wanted to take control of having her coffin made. Well, that really is forward planning. So they used this cedar, an inch thick. And I went down one day and she said, now, Sheila, I want you to line my coffin. And I thought, pardon? This is not my skill set. And a lot of things, but I'm not a coffin liner. And I want it in white silk. Well, you know, actually, those little beasties don't lay or don't make silk white. They make it cream. But I found fabric and I found the warding and the padding and so on. And this coffin that weighed a ton was brought up to my little workshop. And I sat about quilting this coffin, and I did have some silk and I made a lovely little pillow with an English rose on it and so on. Or thinking, if you die before I finish this, I'll kill you. Metaphorically, you know. And that really was my first introduction to somebody dying in Costa Rica. But interestingly, subsequently, some weeks, a month maybe even after she died, her husband said to me something about, you know, death certificate or dealing with her business. And I said, have you registered her death? Do you have to do that? Well, yes, actually, because that's how Costa Rica knows how many people are born and died and what the population is. And if you were in Canada, you would have done it. So why don't you do it here? So the first moral, if you like, or the first learning lesson from all these things is Costa Rica is actually very advanced and very organized when it comes to a lot of these kind of things, and they behave no differently than most of our home nations would. There is a mindset in some communities that somehow when you're in Costa Rica you can do things differently or you don't have to obey any laws. Well, actually you do. But yes, you have to register a death, and it's the actual registration of the death, not the death certificate, that matters legally when you go to pensions and things. So that was my first experience. Then a club member very sadly had a heart attack one night. Husband heard a bang, went into the kitchen, she dropped the pan, she was on the floor, she was having a coronary. He called the ambulance, and when they said, where do you live? He couldn't describe where they lived. He didn't have any Spanish. And they lived in a weird road way off Tinamasti somewhere. The long and short, two friends found a private ambulance, guided it to this house. It was too late. So not being able to just say, here's where my house is, in Spanish, can be life or death. Then another friend's husband died. By this time, I'd started this mission and I organised a discount for members of the Women's Club with a funeral area in San Isidro. And we went there to get the funeral organised. And for some reason, she needed money. We went to the bank. She was very distressed and she was crying. And she said to them, my husband's dead. And they said, well, sorry, but your bank account is frozen. And we had to sort of beg with them to let her have money urgently to deal with the things that needed dealing with. And a lot of banks do that. So my intention is, if my husband predeceases me and I find him dead, my first thing I'm going to do is go to the bank and take out every single penny before I tell them. But, you know, these things can be surprises. So as planning is actually quite important, and knowing these things might happen is valuable. Then another friend, coronary in hospital in San Isidro, died. He wanted to be a body donor, had not organised it. His partner said, okay, I'll contact the university, we'll donate his body. They were a gay couple and they were not married, and you need a gay partner cannot donate their partner's body. It must be a blood relative giving authority. So that we got organised, he got in touch with Peter's family and we got the permission, and the body was, because he died in hospital, they could keep it in refrigeration there. They will only keep bodies that die in hospital. They cannot offer refrigeration to people who die at home. But because he was in hospital, they kept him, the university came, and that was done. So, you know, knowing that, again, that bit of information, that if you're not married, whether gay or hetero or whatever, if you're not married, you cannot legally donate your partner's body.
Sheila,
Yes.
a question that comes to mind. If you die at home and you are a donor, which I am, you just call them and they pick you up at home?
Come to
or
all
if you're an
that. Come
autopsy?
to all that later. We'll
Okay.
have all the questions and open discussion. I'm just going to do 10 points and then open this up and focus on discussion questions, because that's what's most valuable. I'm just trying to pick out some important little lessons from the experience of people dying around us. Then I read of a couple who, in the Tico times, a couple had been injured in a road accident. They were unconscious and they had no ID with them. And the police didn't know where to start, trying to find their relatives and so on. And I thought, at that time, we were relatively new here, driving up and down the Serragil and Murty when that road was hell on earth. And, I would get home and I've got this retrospective fear thing. I don't particularly like sea. I could go in a boat, but I'd come back and have nightmares about drowning. And I'd come home and I'd have nightmares about going off that crazy mountain. And I thought, gosh, if that happened to us, what would I do? And I'm going to come to that just now. What would I do? Come back to that in a moment. And most recently, one of her deaths, a younger member, dying at home, her husband scooping her up, thinking he could get her to hospital more quickly than in an ambulance. But he went to Las Americas. Now, I don't know how good your medical services are down here, but your hospital is San Isidro, yes? No, Cortez. Cortez, of course it is. Cortez is a secondary hospital. San Isidro is tertiary. So for specialist stuff we can't do here, you would go there because they service the south of the country. He didn't have faith in them. He went to Las Americas because he was American and he was used to private medicine. They advertised a 24-hour emergency service, but all they have on duty is this general practitioner. Now, I know the young GP, and he said to me, well, it was a heart attack. I'm not convinced at all, and neither is her husband. But he issued a death certificate. Her body was taken for cremation. It should have been autopsy. We don't know if it was, but they said heart attack. It may have been something else. But there is only a GP. Don't assume that because it's private, it's better. Actually, if you go to the city hospital, and I'm sure Cortez as well, they deal with all the emergencies. They have the guys that know how to deal with this. They have the machinery and so on. So I'm not anti, private medicine, being a Brit. Yes, actually I am. I'm very proud of our socialised system. We have a very good system, but if you are having an emergency, you need people who know how to deal with an emergency, and they do have those people in San Isidro. So that's sort of some of the learning that I've had from dealing with deaths. But these, in the course of all these events, because of the people found in the car, they couldn't identify them. One of the first things I did for the club was design a little form, which is now in the back of this. But, we can help the emergency services to help us, particularly when we don't speak Spanish. So this is your name, address, your nationality, your blood group. Have you an allergy? That may be compromising. I'm allergic, for instance, to iodine in CT scans. That gives me an anaphylactic shock. So, my fear is to think, oh, we better scan her. That would kill me. So things like allergies, next of kin, who to contact in the event of you being unconscious or dead. American Embassy, Canadian Embassy, British Embassy, or whatever. And I made this available for club members. We've got it on the website. And say to people, have it in your handbag, have it in your car. It's our responsibility as visitors to help the emergency services to help us. Then we put on a one-day course on emergency Spanish and produced this little booklet, which has all the body parts in it. Very pretty little drawings. This one's expensive because this we have to get printed commercially. But a face with all the bits on it. And then expressions in the book like he's bleeding badly. I think it's a snake bite. I think it's a coronary heart attack. He's broken a bone. So that very quickly you can identify it's a leg. Oh, what's he broken? I don't know because I don't know the word for a leg and I don't know the word for an arm. So having this and just learning some of these basic expressions, a lot of medical words in Spanish are very similar to English, ataque cardíaco, things like that. So this little book we designed for that one-day course for emergency Spanish, really, really useful to keep by your telephone and to have available. But the form at the back can be taken out photocopied, used in your vehicles. And then I moved on to developing this document, which is dealing with death, burial, and cremation in Costa Rica. And just, it's just facts. If I wrote down all the myths that need dispelling, it would be twice as big, but it's just factual. How you how to organise a funeral, what's the situation with cremation. And when doing this, because at one point in my life I did teach anatomy, I do understand the importance of having donors. And here, Costa Rica used to import bodies from China. China sells its bodies to medical schools. Well, there was a couple of men in Edinburgh years ago that used to dig up bodies and sell them to the university. In the very early days of studying real bodies in anatomy. But it's very, very important. So I contacted the University of Costa Rica and the University of Medical Sciences in Savannah Park, both of which are programs, details in here. I'd no sooner printed this than the University of Costa Rica changed its process. Some people got in touch with them and they were, oh dear, we're embarrassed. So they said, would it help if we came down? And I said, there's some people 85 years old, they really don't want a 4-hour journey to UCR. That's going to be an impediment to them getting there. So they came down. We have now had 7 annual sessions, body donation, and I've written in a couple of publications, and I get phone calls messages from people in Heredia. I've got donors in Evita, donors in Ocochal. Somebody writes and says, I'm in San Pedro, I'm in Alajuela. I'm like, how did they get my name? Can I join your program? It's not mine, but I send them information. I think I've probably signed up about 300 donors now. We actually sent them 4 from Perez in December. We had a very bad 3-4 weeks, 6 deaths. So we sort of thought, okay, that's enough for this year, folks. But it's greatly, greatly appreciated. I'm very happy to, in the discussion, tell you lots more about body donation. So everything you need to know about death and burial is there, okay? And I've got 2 more publications which I'll tell you more about later. But let me just check that I've covered the key points I wanted to do in the intro. There. Yes. Well, first time we were selling them in the Feria in San Isidro, doing a bit of preparation. And a man came up to me and said, how much is it? And I said, 5 mil. I'm not paying that for 8 pieces of paper. And I said, well, it's going to good cause. All these publications and every penny we raise in Women's Club, we have 2 missions, friendship, service. Everything we do for service, every single penny goes to service. This cost of these publications goes to our community service funds. We have raised and used over 9 million in 10 years, in our first 10 years, which is tremendous. So I print these at home, but they do come on the cost, and I'm very embarrassed. I've only got 10 left because another person looks after them, and I didn't realise we'd sold so many. But if any, so that's it. Please, your questions, discussion. Yes.
Okay, my question was, in the States, when you're an organ donor, that goes on your license. Do they do that here?
No, they don't. But what they do have here is a default system. Everybody with a driver's license is a donor unless you opt out, as opposed to opting in, which is different in some countries.
Yeah, could you just
repeat that?
If you have a driver's license here, it is assumed you will be a donor unless you opt out. Not a body donor, an organ donor,
They
right?
didn't tell us that when we got our license.
Hmm?
No one mentioned that when I got my
They don't
license.
tell you a lot of things here. I lived here before. They don't tell you a lot of
Is it? It's not on your
You
license.
do
It's
need
on
to
mine.
listen to it's true.
It could
I
be.
found out I was a donor after I got
Well,
my
usually
license. So whether
they
you
have
or not,
as
it's-
many
unless you
countries,
opt out.
you have to opt in. Here it's an opt out,
It's an opt
even
out.
if it sometimes doesn't work. The bodies are not included, but when you're a body donor, you are given a donor card, plasticized, which I keep in my wallet. But it's not on your driver's license.
I just think they should tell you. They don't tell you a lot of things.
Barbara, back to your question that you started with, sorry.
You had said something about someone dying at home and there was no refrigeration. I'm a donor.
Mhm.
a body donor.
Uh-huh.
So,
What happens?
what happens? You call an ambulance and no.
What happens was we started this, and the university sent a vehicle. But we had Friday night death, and we couldn't send a vehicle, or Saturday death, we couldn't send a vehicle because it was weekend. And I thought, well, this really isn't very helpful, and we don't have refrigeration here. What I did was arrange for the funeral company that gave us a discount to pick bodies, take it to their crematorium in San Jose, store it in the crematorium over the weekend for the university to collect on Monday morning. But that's a cost of transport and refrigeration. And a lot of people, certainly in our community who donate their bodies, are doing it because they can't actually afford, they haven't got a reserve ready for cremation or burial. So that's a big challenge. And ditto holiday time. So I wrote to the university and said, hey, folks, how are we going to handle this? They now guarantee us a 24-hour service. They now have set up that they will do, and I have, and in this document are the phone numbers to phone. Dr. Jessica Gonzalez, this is UCR, and I'm constant, if I appear to be focusing on this, I'll come back to UCMed in a moment. Dr. Jessica Gonzalez, who now manages the program, her telephone number is in it. She's not available. Sergio Jimenez, who used to organise it, is the next reserve. 3 telephone numbers to phone at any point in time, but over the weekend and the holidays, somebody will be available. If it's too late in the day, then the body's all right overnight, they will come the next day. Should that be too difficult, then we will need to do something. The one good thing that is happening, and sorry I didn't have time to check this week, Funerarios Camposanto in San Isidro is building a crematorium. That's the first one in this region, in this area, because we've had to use the 3 funerarias in San Jose who have crematoriums. They are building a creme, and therefore they will have refrigeration facilities. I've already spoken to them. They would be willing to store bodies for the university where it's necessary. But the university so far have managed to deliver. I think where we've not yet had a problem, but may have a problem, I've been communicating with some elderly lady down here who's really chewed up about how she and her husband. I think we've been communicating for 9 months and she hasn't got around to actually doing it because there's too many obstacles. Like they live on a road with no address. Well, sorry, everybody's got address, just get it organised. You give your house a name and you stick a thing within the end of the road, It's not rocket science. But these things are obstacles for older people sometimes. Well, they said we had to have the body at the roadside. No, they didn't. They said they would collect the body provided they could get there. And because it's not a hearse, the dedicated vehicle is like a sedan with no seats in the back, because you can't bend up a body that's in rigor mortis, okay? You have to lay it out. Now, they may not be able to get up some of the hideous roads that some of us live on here, in which case they would look to the people who, the family or neighbours, to say, okay, we lift the body down. And I did deal with one lady with ALS who fell out of her bed the night dead. And the funeral company, they couldn't get the coffin in her house. They couldn't get a stretcher in or in. The man just picked her up in his arms, walked her down through the garden and down the road and into the vehicle. And that was it. It was beautiful. These guys are very experienced. They're used to doing this in this country. But they do look to families, and of course TICOs wouldn't hesitate to collaborate with them, to help them where it's necessary on a bad road. So I did say to the lady, this is what would need to happen. Well, we don't have any friends. I really can't deal with this anymore. So, the responsibility is your own if you live in La La Land,
Sheila, one more question. If the body goes directly to the university, I thought the body had to go through a hospital and it had to be declared dead
No.
What about a suspicious death and an autopsy? I heard that.
Yeah. What is, if you die in a hospital, dead easy. Hospital signs it, they can keep your body, etc. If you die at home, somebody has to attend to certify you're dead. I remember in your discussion last year, somebody said, well, can you transport a body to SEMA to get it confirmed dead? Well, that's not a good idea. And actually, it's illegal. It is absolutely illegal to move anybody until it has been certified dead by an appropriate authority, either the doctor in charge or the judicial authorities. Don't move bodies. And it just reminds me, I've got to share this little story with you, that when I was teaching anatomy, one of our skeletons broke, and one of my colleagues took it into the medical school to get it rewired. And traditionally kept in green shrouds. So she had it in the green shroud, sitting in the front seat of her Mini, with the seatbelt on, driving through. Oh, bless you, Dad, thank you. Driving through Glasgow, and all of a sudden, a car in front of her braked, and she braked, and the skeleton went this on the front seat, and there was a Glasgow bus right next to her, and they're all in the bus going. And, you know, having worked in Glasgow, I could do the vernacular. You see there, she's got a dead body in there. You know, I could hear the humour. It was really good. So, you know, but you still shouldn't transport bodies in your car. But if somebody dies at home, if they have been under the care of a physician doctor within the last 6 weeks, that doctor can sign the death certificate. If they have not been under the care of a doctor, then the judicial authorities will, you know, I know somebody who died in the family went with the Red Cross. The Red Cross should be called. They're the first people who come and check that for any external signs of foul play. They will look for injection sites or cyanosis or whatever. So you call Red Cross, they then call the police. In this occasion, the Red Cross went to the hospital with this widow, got her medical records, and got the doctor to confirm that this man was on his way to death. So he didn't have a general practitioner or community doctor, but they managed to access his records at the hospital. So he was able to be buried. But if you can't access a doctor, then the judicial authorities appoint a coroner, and it can take hours for them to arrive. So be it. But a coroner, medical person appointed by the courts, has to come and certify death. And the death certificate has to be issued before a funerarian can move a body. They cannot pick it up and get it certified in the funerarian. There must be a death certificate, and there must be a death certificate for the body to go to university as well.
So that may take time.
Now,
That's going to take time.
oh, it'll take time for the OIJ to come, but they know that in Costa Rica the processes that just should happen quickly, and people are normally died in 24 hours, so they get there as quickly as they can. If there was going to be a delay, then some other arrangement would need to be made. If there is no obvious cause of death, if you can't get medical records, the cause of death is not known, the body will be taken to the one and only National Morgue at San Joaquin in Heredia, and for autopsy. They did cut the turf for a new forensic centre in Buenos Aires 5-6 years ago, actually in the last president's reign, but then we had an earthquake or something and the money disappeared. So maybe we'll get one in the future, but at the moment the only national morgue is in San Jose, and an autopsy can take 4 to 6 weeks, and if it needs top screening it can take longer. So it's a long drawn out process, simply because they've got a queue and they haven't got enough people, scientists, to do it all. And it goes there, and any person who is being cremated must be autopsied. That is because of historical Costa Rican law, where the family can come along and say, well, of course, they just cremated my father and I know they've knocked him off. Anybody being cremated, they don't have a second signature system like they do in my country. We call it ash cash. You get 2 doctor signatures and you can be cremated. They don't have that here. You have to have the autopsy. That said, another American young woman who died pancreatic cancer, the doctor signed her death certificate in anticipation of it happening the next day when he would not be available. I've seen that happen twice. But when asked, will there be an autopsy because she's got cancer, he said, it's all right, I'll phone my friends, and indicated an autopsy would not be necessary. But she was being cremated and legally she should have been autopsied. But the medics try and find ways around it. And I'm quite sure that some of the funeraria collaborate with that. Why would they bother if they don't have to do it. I'm deeply suspicious. I'm not
It's
cynical,
about
but
money.
Yeah.
It is about money.
Is autopsy, like in the United States, if you want to be cremated, you have to be autopsied as
No.
well?
No.
No, you
Not
don't.
in
No, you
Canada.
don't. Not in the
No.
United States.
you here, if you're being cremated, your body must be autopsied. Which reminds me, if any of you have ever gone on the American Embassy site for information on this, they say in their document, and not uniquely, but Costa Rica has a law that insists every death must be autopsied. I wrote to them and said, this is factually incorrect. Could you can advise me on where you got that information?
Yeah.
Because when I started this, that was the common belief. I went to the Ministry of Health and I said to them, if somebody's died at home and they've had cancer, but they haven't seen a doctor or whatever, do they have to have an autopsy? No. If they've died of something like cancer, you don't need, or if they're going to be cremated, they don't need an autopsy. And then I discovered from the undertakers, they cannot. They say, no, if it's going to crematorium, there has to be an autopsy. I went back to the Ministry of Health. They phoned San Jose and came back and said, sorry, we got this wrong. Yes, the law is that anybody being cremated must be autopsied. Whether or not it always happens is a moot point.
I
I
didn't
didn't
hear
get,
the
I
last
didn't get
part.
the end.
Everybody that is being autopsied, everybody that's being cremated must be autopsied by law. Whether or not it always happens,
There's some wiggle room.
there's possibly wiggle room. And on occasion that might be quite nice. Now, if a body is autopsied at Heredia, the university will still take the body for body donation. They didn't used to, but they will now, as will the University of Medical Sciences. I haven't said too much about them. They're the people who train the biochemists and all the other scientific people who work in hospitals, as well as medicine. They have a much more formal system. They have a legal assessor. You must go to their office. They appoint the witnesses and so on. They're a bit equivocal about how far they will travel for a body. But they have always taken autopsied bodies because they do a lot of work with the parts. Whereas the medical schools generally want a whole body. Gets cut, the head's off, and it gets cut down the middle, and students get it, and that's it. And you land up like bits of wood.
Sheila, let me develop a scenario. A friend comes down to visit me. They die. I call 911. Red Cross comes. They take it from there, and I say I don't know whether she wants to be cremated or not. I need to notify who's next of kin or what. I don't even know. So they would take it. They would say, I don't know how she died. She needs to be autopsied. They would.
No.
She might want to be
No,
next.
that's
Wait.
that's not their jurisdiction.
You can't do that.
So what do they do? I've called Red Cross. She's a friend of mine. I don't know her next of kin.
What you say to the Red Cross is, I've got a body here, I need you. They come, they have the responsibility to inspect the body and establish indeed that it is dead, and that the person's just not deeply unconscious or something, but establish it's dead, and examine the body for any immediate evidence or immediate symptomatology, like cyanosis. We found the body cyanotic, might be indicative of a heart. They will make first observations about the state of the body, or the body was surrounded by vomit or whatever. They will look for anything like puncture wounds, injections, etc. Ask if they're diabetic, or they will do a preliminary inquiry. They fill in a report, which, if necessary, goes to the judicial authorities. If there's no doctor there and you don't know, and you have no idea what this person's wishes are, up to you to try and contact your friends, relatives, to say, do you know what the end of their life wishes? You're the family, what do you want me to do? Right?
So you don't get their embassy involved. The embassy doesn't get involved.
Come to the embassy in a moment. If you've not already called the police, which you certainly should do, if it's an unexplained death on your property, you contact the police. If you don't do it, the Red Cross will. The police will get the coroner to come.
Well,
to
911
certify
will
death.
call whatever's necessary. You call 911.
You call 911 for emergency services. You say, I need an ambulance, I've got a dead body, I need an ambulance, and I need the police.
And the police.
Yeah, right. Now, contacting embassies. Embassies want to know, an American embassy, and if you contact them, they'll give you advice. They say, oh, there's a help sheet on our website, read that. But beyond that, they have no responsibility, and they're certainly not going to pay for any American who dies destitute here. It's just, governments have an obligation to do that, and Americans are very clear that they don't do it. What they will help you with is making arrangements for repatriation of a body, if the body family wanted a body returning to Oregon or something, and or returning ashes or whatever. The consular service will help you. They won't pay for anything, but they will give you advice and they will help you.
But they won't contact next of kin based on their
Yes.
database.
Yes, they will try. Well, that's help. They will try to contact next of kin.
Okay.
If you can't do that, if you don't know the next, what you can say is this person's passport number is, I don't know the family, don't know the next of kin.
Mhm.
This passport number, they will try and track the family. Which brings me really to a really important point if you're planning your end of life and, saying, okay, I want to be cremated, I want to be buried or whatever, is actually making sure that your next of kin know what your wishes are, that you've said, I'd like this funeral company because I like them or whatever, or here's the man you contact in the local cemetery, he'll dig the hole or whatever. As much information, but telling your family or next of kin, but also telling your Costa Rican neighbours or the people who are most likely to find you.
Mhm.
When Suzanne died, we saying to Frank one day, Frank, if you hit yourself in your leg with a machete and you bleed to death and Ollie comes in the morning, would he know who to contact? No. Well, don't you think that's maybe a good idea? And last year I dealt with a delightful man, actually rich, one or two sons of a steelmaker in the States who decided just to opt out and living in his little teak house. He's a delightful man. And he decided he wanted to donate his body. He was dying of advanced liver failure. It was very obvious that his end was nigh. And we got him signed up for the university for donating his body and so on. And we had two envelopes, one on the fridge and one with his neighbour. And they had his next of kin, the telephone numbers, who to contact, his body donation contract. I had arranged with GP in Kupiagre, who'd seen him once and knew that he had cirrhosis and knew that it was untreatable. He'd agreed that if called, he had not seen him for more than 2-3 months, but he agreed that if called, he would attend to sign the death certificate. The neighbours knew that, one or two of his girlfriends knew that, and the envelope was there so that if he was in crisis and went out the door to hospital to die, the envelope went with him. Now that's pretty perfect. If you can do that, I'd want to take my music with me and, a bottle of whiskey. But hey ho, getting it just lined up like that is really, really clever. And I think for people who live alone, that's really, if you can be that smart, if you like, he was just so sensible. And it gave him an enormous peace because he knew that he would die without giving other people the responsibility, and his family knew his wishes, and his brother phoned me afterwards, and it had all fallen into place beautifully. It was nice.
What about, are you required to be embalmed?
Embalming usually only is necessary if a burial is delayed. And a burial may be delayed for very legitimate reasons. A family's request, in which case they may embalm a body for preservation.
I'm thinking, like, if I had my body shipped out of Costa Rica, would it have to be embalmed before it was shipped out?
I would think so.
Yeah.
I would think so.
And
But it's generally shipped out in a coffin. But I can't honestly say that I've been asked that before and I can be certain, but I do think probably.
Question for you about wills. Can we
Wills.
talk about that?
Yes. It's not something yet I've done a lot of work on.
Oh, okay.
But what I can tell you is one of the things we've done in the club is run an annual a seminar most years for the wider expat community, part of our sort of service committee commitment, but to the expat English speaking community. And doing wills, end of life, all this sort of stuff preoccupies us all. You know, people say to you in a conversation, well, are you going to stay here forever? It usually actually means, well, have you thought about, are you going to die here? And, you know, it's always around in the conversation. Solicitors tell people one fact, another solicitor will tell you another. I have now, through the university, located an English-speaking law lecturer, you know, professor of law, willing to come to San Isidro and present a seminar on last wills, testaments, end-of-life wishes, do not resuscitate to keep alive, all this stuff. As soon as COVID, you know, as soon as things settle down, August, September, something like that, we'll have a seminar on that in San Isidro, and I'll make sure that Barbara and Ruth have information, and you'd be welcome.
And I can also put it out on our correspondence.
And where can you get one of those booklets?
I've got all these with me for sale today.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Do you have, do you, I've heard a lot of talk about wills in your home country and then wills here. Do you know anything about that?
Yes, I do. Any will to have bearing in Costa Rica must conform to Costa Rican law and be written in Spanish. We had a property in Spain. We had a will in Spain written in Spanish. That was acceptable here because it was in Spanish and it was from Spain. But here, a will to have any bearing on your property here in Costa Rica must conform to Costa Rican law, must be in Spanish. And wills are a nightmare. Probate is a nightmare. It may take years and you think, yeah, and everybody's squatted on the property and what the hell's going to happen? It's really a nightmare. There's an alternative of putting your property in a trust and naming the beneficiaries there, and then all this will be covered in the seminar.
I could have a seminar like that.
I can offer you some information right now.
Right.
At least if someone's interested because they own property, cars, anything of value in this country, probably the first step is to find an attorney you trust, bilingual, and the process is rather simple. You make a list of what you have of value that can be or is recorded or registered in your name or in your corporation's name. And then it's pretty simple process where it's set up in an office. I believe you need 1, 2, 3, 4 witnesses that you have to bring and or pay. And there are people who work with law offices that for a small fee, about $25, they will show up and be one of the witnesses. And then the attorney will just read, generally in Spanish, but then again in English, sort of like a transaction of land, what the terms of the will are. Then all the witnesses will sign that they listened to that, they heard it, and were present for it. And then it simply becomes a document that stands. Now, I can't say if there's anything contesting it.
It's called a common will, and it's then sent and registered with the Registro Nacional in San Jose. I'd forgotten about that. You're absolutely right. It's called a common will or a simple will or something, and it is witnessed and it's notarized and it goes to the registro, and it can cover property. I think it's got limitations. I'm not sure that it can cover everything, but that's a very helpful reminder. Thank you, and I'm sure that again that will be covered in the seminar. And one thing I do also want him to cover is the business of can I write an end of life directive? And yes, you can, and that has to be notarized legally, but you can state your wishes. You know, medicine, Hippocratic Oath, they are obliged to strive to keep alive. You have the right to say, do not strive to keep alive. Okay?
I had heard that from a lawyer a few years ago that that was not recognized in Costa Rica.
Yeah, you see, that's exactly why I wouldn't ask a lawyer to do a seminar, because most of them don't know enough about civil law.
But
Which is why I get somebody from university who teaches it, Barbara.
But do the doctors recognize it in the hospital, basically?
If you're taking a piece of paper, they've no choice. It's a legal document. but distinguish between striving to keep alive as opposed to assisting death. I mean, people get these things confused. There's a huge difference between assisting someone to die, like depriving them of water. That's a very subtle thing. People will die very quickly as an advanced stage of illness. If you deprive them of liquids, they'll die of dehydration. Have they facilitated death by doing that? That's very different from striving to keep alive and giving you more medications or something. So there's some very subtle stuff in this, and it's very complicated, and people get it very confused. Euthanasia is not permitted by law here. It's not permitted in many countries yet. I think only in 1 or 2 states in the United States that have euthanasia. Only one country in Europe where everybody goes.
What country?
Netherlands.
Netherlands or Switzerland now, I think. I think Switzerland's maybe first. I think there's 2 countries. The UK debate it and debate it and debate it and never make a decision, but hey ho, that's the way they behave.
In the Netherlands, there's a hotel called Check-in at the Checkout Hotel.
What is it called? Check-in at the checkout.
Check-in at the Checkout Hotel, and you
Well,
can-
you've got to do this with a sense of humor. I love
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Check-in
I
at the
thought it was
checkout.
something you could stay as long as you last. It's not quite Hotel California.
You can check out, but you can never leave. You can check out, you can never leave.
If I may briefly share what Sabrina, a local lawyer, did for us, she did the will that you're talking about, very simple, it's a physical property, and she was a bit generic. The current car is this, the date that we signed it, but any future cars also, because we don't plan on buying a lot of things, our corporation for the house. But the one thing I really liked, having gone through my mother's slow demise, and I'm very aware of that, I went to where we are registered to pay our income tax in the United States. Although we live here full time, we have to have a United States
Your
address.
Uncle Sam wants his share, yeah.
That's
I know.
right. So
Who
if
you?
you go to your local states, most of them have a place where you can do what's called advanced medical directive. If you search for that on whatever state in the United States, I can't speak of Canada, but it comes up with samples that you can use. And for my mother, we just printed out one of those samples and she filled it in. What does she want? I don't want to be resuscitated, but if there's a chance, I want this. So it's very black and white. Well, I showed that to Sabrina. I said, this in the States is put on the refrigerator for emergency services. She says, great, leave it. Pull up the one from where you are now in English. I will get it interpreted into Spanish, which she did. We notarized it here with a local Costa Rican notary, and it's on our refrigerator. Not that we plan to die, but it's very simple. And
Fantastic.
it's taken the pressure off of this
Absolutely.
crazy decision making.
This being can and relieving the pressure on yourselves, your family, your neighbours, etc., is tremendous. That sounds super. The fact that you can go and find a template, God bless the internet, and copy that and use it as a sample here in Costa Rica.
Yeah, it's just stuff you don't think about. It's on there.
We also had that will, have the will, and it's from Sabrina. Just a word of warning. Make sure that you read the material very carefully in English because the translation sometimes can get missed. So our one trust the attorney
Very true.
to be able to just say, you've got to spell check and you've got to make sure everything is right.
I think actually that's a very, very good point on all these things because one day the hospital had issued a death certificate for a friend that died, but they actually got his passport number wrong.
Yeah.
And that was just an immediate nightmare. And it took 3 or 4 hours to actually get somebody to reissue that document because they're all scratching their head and, you know, the chief that had to make the decision wasn't available and, blah, blah. Checking every legal document and every formal document, your body contracts, whatever. Critically important.
Very important. And you're right. We caught 2 errors. I'm glad you said that.
You had a question?
Me?
Or were you pointing?
I was just pointing to her.
Yeah.
I have a question. And this is backing up a little bit, but if someone dies in their house, you had said about getting the ambulance there, and then later you said call the Red Cross first. I'm a little confused. And, then it's,
Red Cross are the ambulance service.
they are.
There are private ambulance services, but the sort of official, if you like, Red Cross in Costa Rica is the primary emergency service, Cruz Roja. You phone 911 and you ask for an ambulance, it is Red Cross you're talking to. Okay?
Okay.
Same thing. There are private ambulance services. There is one in San Isidro, but that's your choice. If you wanted to ride to San Jose, you might use them. But if you ring an emergency service here, it will be Red Cross you get.
And so then they like you were saying, they're going to want to ask a few questions about, and then they will notify us that, oh, this sounds like we need to get OHIHOTA involved in it. I mean,
No, they don't say this sounds like we have to. They have to.
they have to. They have to.
You know, if there's no attending physician sign a death certificate, the police will be involved.
Would it be OHIHOTA? I mean, like
Yes.
instead of the local police coming
No, the
up.
local police will have to call in the higher up officials. It's not going to be the beat Bobby. It's going to be a coroner from, in this case, probably, I don't know what
Avita.
presence.
There's one in Avita.
There's one in Avita. There's bound to be a coroner down here
Yeah.
somewhere. I mean, they can't possibly wait for everybody to come from
And
San
the next thing is that someone who has to sign the certificate of death before the body can be moved.
Yes.
So that's all would be.
It would be a coroner
included.
in the UK. You call them coroners in Canada, the United States. Yeah. It's a medical officer appointed by the court system. So if you haven't phoned the police at the same time that you phoned Red Cross will say, well, we need the police, and they will come. But again, there's variations. My neighbour's old father died last week. We found his dad behind the door on the floor. He was a chronic alcoholic. I mean, the man was totally pickled. It was just sad, sad, sad.
He didn't need embalming.
Self-involved.
He died at home. When he last saw a doctor, I have no idea. But his wife told me this morning that her husband Alberto, he had, he paid a doctor privately to come out and certify him.
Yeah,
Because everybody knew that Jorge was on a hiding to nothing, and a doctor came and respected that. They knew his history. It didn't need examination. The neighbours could vouch for the fact that the day before, he was rollicking, and he died. So what's very nice and respectful of this country, much as there's a lot of law that has to be obeyed, you'll find sometimes there's a sidestep and you think, that's saving money. But you'll also find that somebody's found a way around a bit of legislation just to be caring and helpful. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So just to anticipate there's that flexibility. Sometimes may make sense, sometimes may not make sense. But if it helps you, go with it. Unless you think it's illegal, you're right. Because there are things that do have to happen. And moving bodies is not a good idea.
Right. And so if someone dies in the hospital, then they are they're taking control of most of all of it.
They sign the death certificate because they know the cause of death. They keep the body in the morgue until funeral arrangements are made. But they cannot store bodies, by law, they cannot store bodies that have not died in hospital, which is why it's so good that we're getting a crematorium in San Isidro.
I think someone said once that they can only store bodies for 24 hours. Is that true? Or,
Where?
I don't know, maybe in the hospital or somewhere.
Ruthie had a question.
Yeah, Brittany had a question.
Ruthie.
I have a couple of questions. One is, my neighbor told me, and this is secondhand to her, or firsthand or secondhand to me, that they had a death in the family and they called the coroner, and they didn't call an ambulance, they called the coroner, and the coroner said he would not come without $4,200 in cash. Is there fraud involved in some of these things, and how do we know, and should we be prepared to have?
Ruthie, anybody asking a question, is there fraud in Costa Rica?
So I mean, is this
common for
No, it isn't,
for
and I would
to
report
say you
him.
won't
I
come
have
without
no
payment.
compunction for reporting people like that. If that is an incident, if there's a court office here, was this locally here?
I guess it was here, yeah.
I'm quite
Over
honestly
here.
walk
I don't
into-
know where
walk in-
here, but here.
Walk into the office or the police station or something and say, excuse me, we've got a bit of confusion. I would appreciate understanding what the law is and the policy here. Is it necessary to pay the coroner before he comes out, or is it not? And what's the standard fee? And see what answer you get, and find out what the information is. Well, you may wish to know that. You know, these people have to be hung. You know, I don't know if it's legal, but it seems to me very, very unprofessional and inappropriate. Because he is paid by the judiciary system for his job. There is no cost to the citizen for a coroner certifying death. So if he's asking for money, he deserves to be hung. My heart's God, but you know, I mean, that really
That's
offends
one
me.
question.
The
Another
people are
question.
grieving.
Second question. You said that if you want to be cremated, you have to have an autopsy. Did I understand that
Yes.
correctly?
Yes.
Well, in the States, they are obligated to hold the body before cremation.
No, the autopsies are done by the crematoriums.
Done by what?
They're done by the crematoriums. There's 3-4 crematoriums or funeral companies in San Jose that have crematoriums. The body
But
goes.
if it takes 12 to
No,
14 days for
No,
an
no,
autopsy,
that's for the official legal court
Okay.
system autopsy
so they will.
in San Joaquin and Heredia. That's where they can't establish cause of death. The judicial authorities will send the body to San Joaquin for official police investigation to certify, you know, was it heroin or whatever. If you're being cremated and your body is taken to the crematorium carry out